Welcome back everyone to episode 10. In the last video we had a look at the pivot and unpivot functions. In this last video of the episode we're going to cover off the immediate if and the concat functions. So let's head on in to SQL Server Management Studio. Okay then, let's have a very quick look at the next function, the immediate if. Now the immediate if, or IIF, as you can see here, is pretty much exactly the same thing as the case statement. In fact, when you put it in as a function, when SQL Server runs it off, when you execute your query, it treats it pretty much in the same way as a case statement. Now, what's the point of having the two then? Well, this is more like what you see in Excel if you use the if functionality. So all we're saying here, if you present a condition like is salesperson equal to 1, if it's true then we say yes, otherwise everything else we classify it as a no. So it's kind of like your true false condition. If this is true then you do this, else you do this here, all separated by your commas, as you can see there. Very similar to Excel. So all we're trying to do here is pretty much say if our person is a salesperson, put in a yes, otherwise put in a no, and we're going to rename the column like this. So let's have a look at that, and there you have it, yes, yes, no, no, etc. So we know that this person is a salesperson, however this person is not. So that's a very easy and simple way of doing a true-false check, putting in values based on whether it's true or it's false, and returning those values in a column. Now, why would you do that? And why not do just a case statement? Well, the case statement, I would say, is very useful when you've got multiple conditions that you're looking at and returning various different values based on those conditions. Now you can do that with the if statement as well, by building up and nesting ifs within ifs, IIF statements, but as you can see here, it gets very clunky and confusing. So exactly the same with the case statement. The order that you do them is very important. So here we've got our first one, if lead time is less than or equal to 7, if it's true then put in fast and leave it at that. However, if it's false, we then do the next if check, the IIF. So if the lead time is less than or equal to 14, it's average. If it's true, if it's false, then we do the next IIF, and so on and so on. And at the end we have our catch-all, and you've got to remember to close off the same amount of brackets that you open with all these IIF functions. So as you can see, it's very confusing when you start nesting ifs within the same line there. However, when you use a case statement, it's a lot easier to read when you do this functionality. In both cases, however, we get pretty much the same data, average, as we scroll down very fast, etc. So you can see that we achieve exactly the same results. However, it's a lot easier to write a case statement as opposed to nesting multiple IIF statements. But if I was to just do a simple true or false check, you can see how neat and small this bit of code here is. So that's when I'd use that if we're only checking one condition for true or false. However, if there are multiple conditions on the go, we'd use the handy case statement. So that's the IIF. You may see it pop up now and again. Most people tend to stick with a case statement, even if it's a simple true-false check, which is fair enough. Functionality is exactly the same. Lastly, and a very commonly used function both in SQL Server and on Excel, is the concat or the concatenate function itself. Now, all this does is simply take data from multiple columns, adds them together in a new column there. So we're going to look at customer ID and customer name and join them together in a variety of different ways using different concats. So let's have a look at that when we run off the data and compare the different columns with what we're getting here. So we've got our customer ID and our customer name there. What we're going to then do in the first column here is simply concatenate one with the other, and you can put in as many columns as you want to concatenate, simply separated by a comma there. And as it's a function, we still need to open and close our brackets. So as you can see, it's simply join the customer ID with the customer name in this column here. Now there's no spacing whatsoever because we haven't specified that. It's literally joining one bit of data with another in there. Customer 2, what we've done is we've manually added a space between the customer ID and the customer name. As you can see here, put in a comma, put in a space between our two inverted commas there, and we have put in a manual spacer. Now we can of course do whatever we want as our manual spacer. As you can see with customer 3, we've brought in our space, hyphen space, which might make it a bit easier to read as well, and then we've also brought in our website URL. But as you can see, the website URL is butted on against the customer name without the spacer there. So because we've only put our manual spacer between the customer ID and the customer name, no space between the website URL, that's why there's no spaces there, as you can see. So you need to be aware of where you want your manual spaces. Now there is a way to get past all this, and of course we can add in another manual spacer here, but we've also got the concatenate underscore WS command. Now WS stands for with spacer. So all you do at the beginning is you specify your spacer itself. That's going to be the spacer used throughout the entire concatenate function. Then you put your comma, and then you put your columns there, making sure you put them in the order you actually want to display them. So then we separate those as many columns as we want with a comma, and as you can see, it's pretty much exactly the same thing as this one here. Puts a spacer between the customer ID and the customer name. Now as you can see with this one here, we've put one spacer there, concatenate WS, and we've put multiple columns, more than two. So there you can see it's put the spacer between the ID and the name, and also between the name and the website URL. So you could have 100 different columns that you're concatenating, and you simply have to put the spacer in once there, as long as you've got the concatenate with spacer function in there. Now this concatenate function is relatively new. It hasn't been in SQL Server from the start, and quite often some of the more old school developers out there will still be writing their code, concatenating cells, etc., manually using this methodology. So you simply write one column that you want to extract, you put a plus, and then you put, say, a manual spacer, then another plus, and then your other column there. So that's the old method of doing it. And we know that when you add pluses, if you're using figures, it'll add them all together. But when you're using character strings, it'll build them as a concatenate instead. So any figures, it'll add them together. Any string values, varchars, chars, etc., it will concatenate them as a string. Now the problem with this, and the reason why they've brought in concat, is that if you did have any values, for example the customer ID, you can see that stored as a number, you needed to convert that to a varchar or a char of some sort in order to convert it to a character string, because it can't basically deal with two different data types. You see, that's an int and that's a varchar. It can't concatenate the two there. So if we run that off, you can see we get an error because it needs to first convert that to a character string first, and then it can use this plus functionality here to concat. So you may see that in older code as some sort of concatenation, but if you're working with newer versions of SQL Server, simply use the concat functions there, because anything you pass in, as you can see, that's also an integer, but anything you pass in, the concat functionality will automatically cast it or convert it as a string, as a character or varchar automatically. So you don't have to implicitly convert it yourself. So use concat wherever you can. And that pretty much wraps up episode 10 for you. Just a very quick sweep up of a few other common functions that you might see during your SQL career and what they do and how to use them in your code. Once again, well done for bearing with me all this way, and we've got one more SQL coding episode for you coming up, episode 11. Until we meet again in that video, I hope you all have a fantastic day.